Welcome to the You're Not Crazy podcast, hosted by Jessica Knight, a certified life coach who specializes in healing from narcissistic and emotional abuse. This podcast is intended to help you identify manipulative and abusive behavior, set boundaries with yourself and others, and heal the relationship with yourself so you can learn to love in a healthy way. You can connect with Jessica and find additional resources, content, and coaching at emotionalabusecoach.com.
Hello, and thank you so much for being here. I'm going to go through the fine print very quickly. If you are looking for coaching, you can head to my website, emotionalabusecoach.com. I have a one-off validation call that is basically like a deep dive on you, and we go through what's going on right now and help you figure out a path forward. It's like a week of coaching in an hour. And then if you are looking for ongoing work, because you know that this is going to be longer, depending on where you are in the process, I do work one-on-one with clients. Space is limited, but that's what my clarity call is for. You can go on and book that. And if you do want to work with me, we basically talk about what that looks like on that clarity call. You likely will leave with a little clarity, but it's not like a free coaching session. It's more so, let's get on the same page and see if we're a good fit. I have courses available on my website, emotionalabusecoach.com. There are coaches on divorcing a high conflict person. There's a course on emotional abuse breakthrough, which is kind of directly related to this episode. And you also can find me on Substack. Each month I'm going to be doing a new topic. Last month was sexual coercion and the ways that coercive control sort of goes in and out of that. And now in this month, February, it has been toxic breakups, why we feel like we can't leave, why we get so stuck. And the topic for today, trauma bonding, is something that I am not approaching on the Substack in the same way that I will in this episode. I likely will write something that's in line with it, but the purpose today is to kind of make trauma bonding a bit more understandable for you. And when we are leaving an abusive relationship, we are trauma bonded. So that's why it is so hard to leave. In writing on Substack to the Substack community this month, my focus has been more about understanding like the ins and outs of why we get stuck in a toxic breakup. But the undertone of all of it is that we are trauma bonded to them. That's also why we are stuck. So if you would like to join that conversation and to read more articles or to just get some like different perspective, you can link to my Substack. I will put that in the show notes. Or you can just type in Jessica Knight Coaching, all one word on Substack. So there is the fine print. And now today, I want to talk about the trauma bond. And I want to say this before we dive in. You are not trauma bonded to somebody because you have shared trauma. That could happen. You could have shared trauma. However, you are not trauma bonded due to that shared trauma or if you both have a traumatic past. You are trauma bonded due to the cycle of intermittent reinforcement. There's positive feedback every once in a while in an intermittent way, and you never know what's going to happen or where it's going to go or how it's going to go. In these relationships, you most often feel empty and struggle to leave a relationship even though it's hurting you. That's usually how you know that you are trauma bonded. And so in this episode today, what I would like to do is to talk a little bit more about why you feel trapped in a toxic relationship. And now this could be with a partner, a friend, or even a family member. If you find yourself unable to walk away, I hope that this episode helps shine a light on why, because I know when I was going through all of this, I always wanted to understand why I was doing certain things and thinking certain things and why the other person was too. This isn't about, being weak. This isn't about poor decision making. It's trauma bonding. It's a psychological cycle that keeps you hooked through the emotional conditioning. And if all of these things resonate with you and the only word that doesn't is trauma bond, then use another word for it, because it's going to be understanding that your trauma bond and breaking the trauma bond is going to be your path to healing. It used to be called, or it can be called also, a betrayal bond. That term was framed by Dr. Patrick Carnes, and it is an in-depth study. His book is an in-depth study on these relationships, why they form, who is susceptible, and how and why they are so powerful. And if you think about it, like, a lot of people will say things like, well, but a betrayal bond is like if they cheat on you. That's not true. In my perspective, a betrayal bond is when we are strongly attached to someone that continues to hurt us and they're destructive to us and we can't leave. And it's not just that we can't leave because like they're there. It's like, no, we actually feel like we can't leave. Like, it would be easier to, rip off our own hand than to leave this relationship. But I understand that these things are really hard to understand. And so I want to think about it today through the cycle of abuse, because in the cycle of abuse, and if you've never heard of that term before, I have an episode on it. It's one of the early ones. And I also have one on the nuance of the cycle of abuse. If you go to Google Images and type in the cycle of abuse, it will absolutely come up. And you can just think about seeing yourself in that cycle. There is a cycle of chaos and calm. That's like a very simple way of talking about it, because it is absolutely, that's what's going on there. The cycle of abuse goes from calm to tensions rising to abusive incident to reconciliation back to calm. And you'll hear me say in a lot of episodes, it can happen in 10 minutes. It can happen in 6 months. It can happen in a week. I had a partner that I used to be able to tell he could not last 2 weeks without it going back around again. And so if you ever felt trapped in a toxic relationship like that, you're likely also experiencing the cycle of abuse. But since this episode is about the trauma bond and why we feel like we can't leave, I want to talk a little bit about that cycle of chaos and calm. When we are in these relationships, it often follows a pattern of extreme highs, emotional highs, and really low lows. And when things are chaotic, when you're arguing, when there's blame constantly or manipulation, or they're shaming you, or you're being gaslit and you know it, this creates distress and confusion. You are probably walking around gaslit. You don't know what's right and what's left. You might be journaling, or you're just confused, or you're tired, or you're distracted, or you just are trying to get through the day, or you're waiting for the moment when there's not a fight. You're on edge. That's a cycle of chaos. And what comes after that, which is usually followed after an abusive incident, is the calm. They apologize. They promise to change, or there may be some grand gesture of love bombing. And then you feel relief and you think that it might get better, and you see that inkling of hope, and you tell yourself maybe this is the time, or after this time is the one that I'm going to leave. But this back and forth, whether it's happening in a day, in an hour, in a month, in a week, in a year, it doesn't matter the time frame. The back and forth creates an addictive loop in your brain. And the more chaotic the lows, the more powerful that relief feels when you experience that high. And it's really twisted. It's a really twisted form of emotional conditioning. It's certainly emotional coercion, and it traps you in the relationship, because now you're stuck. Now you're waiting constantly for the good to come. And then, but if you're anything like me, the good stops feeling good. And then the good, it's interesting. It's as I say that, it's reminding me how the other person, my ex-partner, most recent ex, he would feel really good in those good moments. And then he'd look and point at me and ask me why I don't. And I was in my mind, I'm because this is psychotic. But for him, it was but it's so good. It's so good. That was such a good day. And it's okay, now I'm held to this like impossible standard that if I just don't repeat this day every day, like, but it didn't feel good. Like the good doesn't even feel good, but it's better than the bad. So we settle for like that breadcrumb of the good that's not good, but it's better than the bad, which leads us to this addictive cycle of intermittent reinforcement. And intermittent reinforcement is the most addictive cycle or pattern because there is no pattern to it. You never know when the next good moment will come. So you stay invested. You try and earn it. It is called intermittent reinforcement, which is a psychological mechanism that makes toxic relationships so hard to leave because you become hooked waiting for those fleeting moments of love or validation or peace. And when they come, they feel intoxicating. It gives you hope that things will get better. And maybe this time they mean it. And the example I typically give is like the mouse with the cheese. It's like if the mouse never knows when you're going to feed him, he's going to treat every single like crumb of that cheese like it is gold. But if you are, feeding it consistently and it's like, and it's always going to come, like the mouse knows it's always going to come. And like, that's what it depends on. But if it's coming, and then it just like has like 7 days of like nothing at all, and then they get half a piece of cheese, like they're so excited. Now it's gold again. But then it just goes back around the cycle, And so this really starts to affect your nervous system because it activates our stress responses. And before we're aware of it, before we see what's happening, all we know is that we're in this heightened state of anxiety or fear. We feel like we don't trust them. We feel like we don't understand why they're doing what they're doing. We feel like we're the crazy ones because like they seem to be caring and loving and they're really happy, but I'm really miserable. And without the awareness of what's actually going on, I believe it keeps us stuck longer because that's why like in my emotional abuse breakthrough course, I really talk a lot about when we can understand the pattern and see the pattern, then we start to be able to break free because if we don't know what's going on, we can't help it. And so when we're feeling so activated, we do feel like it's our fault. They're fine. Other people can probably say like, oh, but look, he's trying, right? You might feel responsible for their emotions. You might be constantly accused of being the problem by them. You might find yourself walking on eggshells to fix things. You might feel like you don't even know how to explain what's going on to your therapist and you're in survival mode and you don't even know it because all of this is going on. It is chaos. And when you're stuck in that cycle in chaos and distress, of course, you're not going to be able to think clearly or even have the bandwidth to step outside and wonder, what is going on here? And so if you take a step back and think about it for a second, a healthy relationship is built on neutrality, trust, emotional safety, not control, not manipulation or coercion. And if you're constantly feeling off balance, questioning yourself or doubting your reality, that's not your fault. That is the cycle at play. And I think one of the things that sort of keeps us in that cycle of control are two main things. One of them is the illusion of change. Abusive people don't change just because they say they're going to change. If anything, the cycle itself depends on their ability to make you believe that they're going to change so that you stay. But you have to look at the patterns. Do they actually want to change or not? They're a part of the manipulation. They're causing the manipulation in a lot of ways, right? So love bombing or promises or occasional good behavior, they're not proof of growth. Proof of growth looks different because what they want to do is convince you that they're changing just enough to keep you hooked. And that is a survival tactic for them. That is not what growth looks like. Every time you pull away or you set a boundary or you say I'm done and I'm going to leave, they activate damage control mode. They're going to apologize. They're going to love bomb. Or they could blame you. They could blame you and they could shame you. So then you feel really bad using the biggest words. But, we either see that or we see these promises of therapy and big declarations of love. But all they're doing is stalling for time because in their minds, they don't need to change. They just need you to believe that they will. Because once they sense that you're convinced, they go right back to the same patterns until the next crisis or the next outburst or the next excuse to start fresh. If change is not consistent, it's not real. And if it's not coming from that person wanting to take true change and look at the past behaviors and where they come from and why they think that way, they will not change. True growth is not about these grand gestures. It's about daily accountability and long-term action. If somebody's actually beginning to change, you may feel that calm. You're probably still going to be anxious, but it'll be more of a natural calm, and you'll be able to see that they are actually working on their behavior. But if you keep hearing the same apologies and seeing the same behavior, you are being manipulated. They're lying. Genuine change requires deep internal work, and that does not happen overnight, especially just because they're scared of losing you. Change looks like actually committing to therapy or coaching, accountability that isn't forced by a crisis moment, and a behavior that remains stable and consistent when you're no longer watching them or paying attention to it. If they are serious, they wouldn't need a meltdown or an ultimatum to start changing their behavior. The second thing that I wanted to bring up of why this is so hard is the biological trap. A lot of people feel ashamed for staying in abusive relationships, but they shouldn't, because it isn't just about emotional manipulation. It literally feels like your nervous system is being hijacked. Your brain is wired for survival. When you're in a toxic relationship, you're constantly in fight or flight mode. The stress, the unpredictability, the conflict trigger of your cortisol levels, which is your stress hormone, they all spike. Dopamine, which is the pleasure chemical, now is a weapon. When the abuser suddenly flips to being nice again, or they're apologizing, or they're being affectionate, or they're just not being abusive, your brain releases dopamine. And that momentary high feels like relief. It actually probably feels like heroin because it's actually part of the chemical addiction cycle. Intermittent reinforcement makes this so much worse because the good moments come randomly. So your brain starts chasing them, just like a gambler would. They win one slot. Now they want to keep going and they keep going because they might win. And this keeps you hooked, always waiting for that next tiny small hit of affection or peace. And the result is that you stay, and you don't stay because you're weak. You stay because your nervous system has begun to be trained to associate love with survival. One of the biggest things that I learned in my healing from, I guess, a lifetime of abuse, I grew up in an abusive home, was that I'm conditioned to intermittent reinforcement. That is my system knows that in a way as love. And it's really sick and sad. But I realized I was getting intermittent reinforcement from my mom over the holidays. And I was just oh my God, it was like watching a slideshow before my eyes of every moment that has ever happened where this has been the cycle, and it's sickening. It's I think it's also why I'm so repelled by it. And I was repelled by it in my last relationship. And the good news is that in healing, you also can begin to rewire your brain. And this is why I think knowledge is so important around this is once you start to recognize the pattern and you see what's going on, it's really hard to unsee it. It's when somebody tells you oh my God, you are being gaslit. He's gaslighting you right now. And then you go back to that argument. It's really hard to then tell yourself, oh no, I'm not being gaslit. She was lying. It's no, that person loves me and cares about me. They told me that he's gaslighting me. How is he gaslighting me right now? When he says the sky is blue and you're or actually he would say the sky is red and you're no, the sky is blue. And they're no, it's red. And then they're doubling down that it's red. And you start to wonder if it's red. It's you're no, you're totally gaslighting me right now. It's but you need to also help yourself break free from the substance in a way, and when I told that story earlier about that I became desensitized to the good moments or the solid moments, or even just the non-abusive moments, I realized that even the good moments weren't feeling good anymore, but I was breaking free from that substance, right? So there was a bit of a withdrawal. But when you're out of the cycle, your nervous system can begin healing. And so I think that's an important point, is that it's not going to feel good. So many people are but if I this feels so awful. It's yeah, I know. And it's healing from a drug addiction. There is withdrawal. I have had so many dark nights of the soul. And I will say the one thing that helped was knowing that there was relief on the other side because I wasn't engaging in this pattern anymore. And I had to believe that there was something better on the other side because this was awful. And so if that's you, and if you are like, but every time we don't talk, it's like, I want you to try and see it as that you're going back for the addiction. You're going back to feel that feeling. That's why you're feeling this way. And your brain will need consistency to recover, which means eventually probably removing yourself from the chaos completely. If they are not going to change and do the work on themselves, then the next step here is really thinking about, can I stay in the relationship? And if you've been here, there's so many stages of relationship that people are in. And I totally, I have been there and I get that. And sometimes you can begin to just like set those boundaries that are just for yourself. Maybe it's even something as simple as like, when he love bombs me after the next fight, I'm not going to pretend that it's fine. That's like such a small thing, but it's like, yeah, those flowers, they're not going to feel great. Those texts the next day, oh my God. I used to get so frustrated when I would get these like love mommy texts the next day after like a complete fucking meltdown. And I'd be like, there's no substance to them anymore. Nothing. It's just words that I can't even say back anymore because the pattern's going on and I'm trying to figure out how to leave safely, mentally safely, physically safely. And I can't pretend. I know that this one is hard, but I want to just I'm going to say it because I don't, so many people listen to this podcast. I don't actually know, the stage of relationship people are at, but if you are beginning to leave or you're stepping away, I will say this, and I know this, and this is something that when I was in it, and if somebody told me that, or if I listened to it on a podcast like this, I probably would have rolled my eyes and said, I can't do that. So I am with you, rolling my eyes at myself. However, the longer that you're away from the manipulation, the clearer your thinking becomes. I promise you that. I promise you that. Because I've had to go through it and realize it, and then I had to go through it again. And I knew it was on the other side, and it still would talk like hell to get there. But you start realizing you never needed their validation, but what you needed was the space to get to your own peace of mind. And that's why people say no contact is best. They say it because that is like the kind of cleanest, quote unquote, way to get there for your own sanity. That's really impossible for a lot of people. But even if you just take space after an argument to sit with yourself and you're not soothing them, but you're like leaning into soothing yourself, or you're taking mental space from replying to an abusive message or even a love bombing message, that's giving yourself the time and space that you need. Because this is not just about leaving a trauma bond or an abusive person. This is about reclaiming your brain from the system. The trauma bond is designed to keep you trapped. And once you begin to break free from that illusion and the chaos, you can finally experience what real safety looks like. And I think that like safety can really come from us having a bit more of that solid ground and a relationship to ourselves. And so, like I said, the purpose of this message, or of this post, sorry, I was writing right before this. So my brain is, I don't know, on that, I guess. But like I was writing this up, but what I'm trying to say is that if you are feeling like this is something that is going on, for you, remember that real change is boring. Honestly, it takes a while. It is frustrating. But when you start to recognize these tactics, it helps free you from the self-blame, and it helps you begin to break out of like not seeing the truth and to begin to see this is not your fault. I really hope that this was helpful for you. I hope that it was helpful to begin to break out some of the ways that the cycle of trauma bonding is affecting you and what it looks like. And if you need support, if you are looking for, more content on this, I will say, if you are listening to this and you're like, oh my God, I don't know where to start looking at the patterns. Look at where you fall into the cycle. That's what you can do first. And then the clearer you are with yourself, like you owe it to yourself to be clear with yourself. You owe it to yourself to be clear. I know that it's scary. And I know that it feels like if you start seeing it for what it is, you might not leave the relationship. But if I had one message that I wanted like the entire world to hear, it would be that you don't have to stay in something that's abusive. You don't have to be less of a person or feel like you're less of a person or not live with your full agency for somebody else. Like, that's not why you're here. And if you are going to be here, and if you want to stay in the relationship for whatever reason, or maybe like you kind of have to, like maybe it's like, you're married and you know that right now you can't do it. Seeing it for what it is going to help you begin to set boundaries and to get clear. And so if you need support on this journey, you can always reach out to me at emotionalabusecoach.com. That's where my courses, the types of calls and my pricing and everything and how to work with me is. My Substack is linked in the show notes and where I will be writing about this topic all month. Next month, I'll be talking about gaslighting in March. And if you want to email me, if emailing me is easier to reach out and see which option of a call might be best for you, you always can do that by emailing Jessica at jessicaknightcoaching.com. And I really hope that this was helpful for you. I know trauma bonds are really hard to understand, but you understanding where you are in the cycle is what's going to help you break the cycle.